Welcome to SC-300 Practice Exam 3, Security and Risk. You will work through 45 original identity and access administration questions using the Identity Access Dossier. Read each scenario and every requirement. After the answer choices, you will hear, "Lock in your answer." Then you get exactly 3 seconds of silence. Pause if you need more time. The review gives the complete correct answer, a concise mechanism-focused explanation, and an exam clue. Question 1 of 45. Select 2 answers. Contoso permits partner analysts to use SharePoint Online from unmanaged devices. The analysts must be able to view and edit documents in supported browser sessions, but they must not be able to download files. Contoso must enforce the restriction in real time without installing software on the partner devices. Which 2 configurations should an identity security analyst implement? Option A. Create a Microsoft Entra Conditional Access policy for the partner analysts and SharePoint Online, and configure the session control to use Conditional Access App Control. Option B. Create a Defender for Cloud Apps Access policy that blocks SharePoint Online for the partner analysts on unmanaged devices. Option C. Create a Defender for Cloud Apps session policy, scoped to the applicable SharePoint browser sessions. Select Control File Download with inspection, and set the action to block. Option D. Create a Cloud Discovery policy for SharePoint download activity, and configure it to block matching downloads. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are C. Create a Defender for Cloud Apps session policy scoped to the applicable SharePoint browser sessions. Select Control File Download with inspection, and set the action to block. And A. Create a Microsoft Entra Conditional Access policy for the partner analysts and SharePoint Online, and configure the session control to use Conditional Access App Control. Conditional Access App Control is the session path for real-time monitoring and control, including unmanaged device browser sessions without a device installation. The Microsoft Entra Conditional Access policy routes the targeted SharePoint sessions to the control. A Defender for Cloud Apps session policy then allows the session to continue while Control File Download with inspection with the block action prevents downloads. This satisfies both continued browser access and granular enforcement. Exam clue. Separate traffic steering from granular enforcement. Conditional Access routes the session to Conditional Access App Control, and a Defender for Cloud Apps session policy controls activities inside that session. Question 2 of 45. Select 1 answer. Contoso updates the legal text in an existing Microsoft Entra Terms of Use policy. An administrator uploads the new PDF version and enables Require Reaccept. During an incident review, users with active sessions can still access the governed app without accepting the new version. Contoso must require acceptance at the next access attempt without deleting the acceptance history for the old policy. What should the administrator do? Option A. Create a new Terms of Use policy from the updated PDF. Use it as the Terms of Use grant control for the governed app, and have affected users sign out and sign back in before their next access attempt. Option B. Keep the current configuration and wait for each existing session to expire before expecting the new version prompt. Option C. Delete the user's consent events from the Microsoft Entra audit log so that the existing Terms of Use policy prompts them again. Option D. Delete the existing Terms of Use policy and recreate it from the updated PDF, then retarget the Conditional Access policy. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Create a new Terms of Use policy from the updated PDF. Use it as the Terms of Use grant control for the governed app, and have affected users sign out and sign back in before their next access attempt. Microsoft documents that require reaccept on an updated PDF does not force acceptance until the current session expires, and identifies creating a new terms of use policy as a way to ensure reacceptance. Microsoft also states that users in scope need to sign out and sign back in to satisfy a second terms of use policy. The keyed plan includes that required session transition before the next governed access attempt. Because the old policy remains intact, its acceptance records are preserved. Deleting and recreating it would delete those records. Exam clue. When troubleshooting a terms of use update, distinguish document versioning from policy identity and account for the session transition. Require reaccept respects current sessions. Users must sign out and back in to satisfy a second policy. And deleting the old policy deletes its acceptance records. Question 3 of 45. Select one answer. A security analyst investigates unexpected privileged role administrator activations in a production tenant. The analyst must review all role assignment changes and activations done through PIM, plus PIM policy management activity, for Microsoft Entra roles across administrators during the last 21 days. Which PIM report should the analyst use? Option A. In Privileged Identity Management, open Azure Resources and use Resource Audit. Option B. In Privileged Identity Management, open Microsoft Entra roles and use Resource Audit. Option C. In Privileged Identity Management, open Microsoft Entra roles and use My Audit. Option D. Open the Microsoft Entra Risky Sign-ins report and filter for Privileged Role Administrator. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. In Privileged Identity Management, open Microsoft Entra roles and use Resource Audit. For Microsoft Entra roles, PIM Resource Audit shows all activity associated with role assignments and PIM policy management in PIM. The documented PIM audit history includes role assignment changes and activations done through PIM and retains 30 days, so the requested 21-day window is available. My Audit would narrow the evidence to the current analyst. Azure Resources is the wrong privileged role plane, and risky sign-ins do not provide the requested PIM history. Exam clue. Choose a PIM audit surface by both role plane and actor scope. Microsoft Entra roles versus Azure Resources. Then Resource Audit for all activity versus My Audit for your own activity. Question 4 of 45. Select two answers. Contoso has two emergency access accounts. Both accounts use FIDO2 security keys, are excluded from conditional access policies that block or restrict sign-in, and generate an alert on every sign-in. Emergency Admin 1 is synchronized from an on-premises forest and has an active permanent global administrator assignment. Emergency Admin 2 is cloud-only, but has an eligible global administrator assignment that requires PIM activation. Contoso must ensure that both accounts remain usable during an on-premises identity outage and a PIM activation failure. Which two actions should the identity security analyst take? Option A. Replace the FIDO2 security keys with the same Microsoft Authenticator method used by normal administrators. Option B. Remove both conditional access exclusions and require a compliant device for each emergency access account. Option C. Replace Emergency Admin 1 with a cloud-only account that uses the tenant's .onmicrosoft.com domain and is not synchronized or federated. Option D. Change Emergency Admin 2's global administrator assignment from eligible to active permanent. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are D. Change Emergency Admin 2's global administrator assignment from eligible to active permanent, and C. Replace Emergency Admin 1 with a cloud-only account that uses the tenant's .onmicrosoft.com domain and is not synchronized or federated. Microsoft recommends 2 or more emergency access accounts that are cloud-only, use the onmicrosoft.com domain, and are neither federated nor synchronized, which removes dependency on the on-premises identity system. Microsoft also recommends that their global administrator assignments be active permanent rather than PIM eligible, removing the activation dependency. The existing FIDO2 methods, conditional access exclusions, and sign-in alerts already align with the documented safeguards and should remain. Exam clue. For break glass resilience, inventory every dependency in the sign-in path: identity source, authentication method, conditional access, and role activation must remain available when normal control planes fail. Question 5 of 45. Select one answer. Tailspin discovers that a conditional access policy protecting administrative portals changed from report only to on at 0920. No test sign-in was generated during the change window. An identity security analyst must identify who made the change, confirm the target policy, and compare the property values before and after the update in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. Which evidence should the analyst review? Option A, a user sign-in log event and its conditional access tab from after 0920. Option B, the Microsoft Entra provisioning logs filtered to the administrative portal enterprise applications. Option C, the conditional access insights and reporting workbook for the policy during the change window. Option D, the Microsoft Entra directory audit log entry for the conditional access policy update, including initiated by, targets, correlation ID, and modified properties. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D, the Microsoft Entra directory audit log entry for the conditional access policy update, including initiated by, targets, correlation ID, and modified properties. Microsoft Entra audit logs are the directory system activity ledger for configuration changes. The update event identifies the activity and status, actor and target resource, correlation ID, and, when applicable, old and new values for modified properties. Those fields directly answer who enabled the policy and what changed without requiring a runtime sign-in. The workbook and sign-in logs describe policy impact or evaluation, while provisioning logs describe object movement. Exam clue. Match evidence to the event lifecycle. Use audit logs for who changed configuration and what values changed. Use sign-in logs for how that configuration evaluated during authentication. Question 6 of 45. Select one answer. During Tailspin's Global Secure Access pilot, Microsoft Entra ID protection records a high-risk sign-in for a pilot user with the detection type anomalous token. The sign-in risk conditional access policy applied, and the session contains a successful phishing-resistant MFA claim, but the risky sign-in remains at risk. The user denies the activity, and the session device and IP address do not match the user's known activity. Tailspin's authorized incident responders can block users, revoke sessions, and reset credentials. What should the identity security analyst recommend? Option A, disable the sign-in risk policy and replace it with a high user risk policy that requires risk remediation. Option B, dismiss the risky sign-in because phishing-resistant MFA succeeded in the session. Option C, treat anomalous token as a token theft-related exception to MFA auto-remediation. Confirm the sign-in as compromised, and invoke the containment workflow to block the user, revoke sessions, and reset the credential. Option D, wait for the successful MFA claim to change the risky sign-in from at risk to remediated automatically. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Treat anomalous token as a token theft-related exception to MFA auto-remediation. Confirm the sign-in as compromised, and invoke the containment workflow to block the user, revoke sessions, and reset the credential. Microsoft documents that sessions with MFA claims are not auto-remediated when token theft-related detections, such as anomalous token, trigger. That explains why the event remains at risk despite successful phishing-resistant MFA. Because the user denies the activity and the session evidence is inconsistent, the event should be confirmed compromised, and the established containment workflow should block the user, revoke sessions, and reset the credential. Dismissal is reserved for investigated safe activity, and changing policy type does not contain the suspect session. Exam clue. Do not treat an MFA claim as universal proof that a risky session is safe. First, classify the detection. Then, let token/session evidence drive disposition and containment. Question 7 of 45. Arrange all actions from first to last. Tailspin has onboarded its tenant to Global Secure Access. Supported clients are installed, connected, and healthy on devices used by the Microsoft 365 pilot group. But no traffic forwarding profile is enabled or assigned to the group. The Identity Security Analyst has the Global Secure Access Administrator and Application Administrator roles. Tailspin must deploy Microsoft Entra Internet Access for supported Microsoft 365 traffic through a controlled pilot. The runbook requires the forwarding configuration to be complete, then verified on a pilot client before production-like test traffic is generated and validated. Order the actions the Identity Security Analyst should perform. Items in the displayed order. Item A. Review Global Secure Access traffic logs for that generated test traffic and verify the user, destination, result, and forwarding profile. Item B. From the verified pilot client, generate the approved Microsoft 365 test traffic. Item C. Complete the forwarding configuration by enabling the Microsoft traffic profile and assigning Microsoft 365 Pilot to the profile. Item D. After the client refreshes its profile, use Advanced Diagnostics Forwarding Profile to verify that Microsoft Entra and Microsoft 365 rules are present. Lock in your answer. The correct order is: Step 1. Complete the forwarding configuration by enabling the Microsoft traffic profile and assigning Microsoft 365 Pilot to the profile. Step 2. After the client refreshes its profile, use Advanced Diagnostics Forwarding Profile to verify that Microsoft Entra and Microsoft 365 rules are present. Step 3. From the verified pilot client, generate the approved Microsoft 365 test traffic. Step 4. Review Global Secure Access traffic logs for that generated test traffic and verify the user, destination, result, and forwarding profile. Enabling the Microsoft traffic profile and assigning Microsoft 365 Pilot are both required before supported traffic is acquired for the pilot. But the cited source does not prove a mandatory order between those two configuration operations. The first action therefore compounds them without scoring their internal order. After that configuration reaches the already healthy client, Advanced Diagnostics can verify receipt of the Microsoft Entra and Microsoft 365 rules. Tailspin's runbook requires this local proof before generating production-like test traffic. Global Secure Access traffic logs summarize connections and transactions that occurred, so the approved traffic must be generated before its user, destination, result, and forwarding profile evidence can be reviewed. These genuine dependencies uniquely require BADC. Exam clue. Treat source-independent configuration prerequisites as one stage, then follow the evidence chain. Prove the client received the rules, generate the approved traffic, and review the resulting traffic log record. Question 8 of 45. Select two answers. Tailspin detects a newly registered automation app that signs in with a client secret and has a high-privilege Microsoft Graph application permission. Tenant-wide admin consent was granted, but no user has granted a delegated permission to the app. An existing custom OAuth app policy filters on the users who authorized an app. The policy produces no alert for this daemon, even though app governance ingestion is healthy. Tailspin must preserve the existing policy for risky user-consented apps and add policy coverage for this newly registered, highly privileged workload. Which two actions should the identity security analyst take? Option A. Increase the minimum number of authorizing users in the existing OAuth app policy. Option B. Create a Microsoft 365 app governance policy from the new highly privileged app permission template and scope it to the workload population that requires monitoring. Option C. Retain the custom OAuth app policy for delegated apps that are authorized by users in the tenant. Do not expect its authorizer filters to match this app-only daemon. Option D. Create a cloud discovery anomaly policy for unusual traffic volume from the daemon. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Create a Microsoft 365 app governance policy from the new highly privileged app permission template and scope it to the workload population that requires monitoring. And C. Retain the custom OAuth app policy for delegated apps that are authorized by users in the tenant. Do not expect its authorizer filters to match this app-only daemon. Microsoft documents that custom OAuth app policies trigger alerts only for apps authorized by users in the tenant. Tailspin should therefore keep its authorizer-based policy for the delegated user consent population it was designed to evaluate, not tune it as though the daemon had authorizing users. Microsoft also provides a new highly privileged app permission policy template in app governance for newly registered apps, granted write or other powerful permissions. That policy plane matches the app-only workload evidence and adds the missing coverage without confusing it with cloud discovery controls. Exam clue. First, classify the authorization evidence. Delegated consent has an authorizing user, while client credential application access is app-only. Then choose the policy plane whose filters actually exist for that actor and grant type. Question 9 of 45. Select one answer. Tailspin sends Microsoft Entra user sign-ins and service principal sign-ins to a log analytics workspace. An automation app uses a client secret. Ingestion for the service principal category is confirmed, but a query against sign-in logs returns no events for the app. The analyst has the service principal object ID and must count its failed sign-ins by target resource during the last hour. Which KQL query should the analyst use? Option A. AAD service principal signing logs, where time generated by a go plus one H'er, where service principal ID equals spare and result type equals failure. Summarize failed sign-ins equals count plus by resource theorists. Option B. AAD service principal sign logs, where time generated by a go plus one H'er, where app ID equals spare and result type equals failure. Summarize failed sign-ins equals count plus by resource dispertiving. Option C. Sign-in logs, where time generated by a go plus one H'er, where service principal ID equals bare and result type equals 0. Summarize failed sign-ins equals count plus by resource dispertivin. Option D. AAD managed identity sign logs, where time generated by a go plus one H'er, where service principal ID equals bare. Summarize failed sign-ins equals count plus by resource dispertiving. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. AAD service principal sign-up logs, where time generated readalize a go one H'er, where service principal ID == and result type == failure, summarize failed sign-ins = count by resource spacing. AADServicePrincipalSignInLogs is the dedicated Azure Monitor table for Microsoft Entra Service Principal sign-ins. Its documented fields include Service Principal ID for the initiating service principal, resource description for the target, result type for success or failure, and time generated for the event time. The correct query uses the supplied object ID in the matching field, limits the time window, keeps failures, and aggregates by the requested resource. The alternatives select the user or managed identity plane or confuse the application ID with the service principal object ID. Exam clue. Choose the log analytics table from the actor category before writing the rest of the KQL. User, service principal, and managed identity sign-ins have different evidence surfaces. Then match the identifier you possess to the corresponding column. Question 10 of 45. Select one answer. Tailspin is replacing VPN access for a pilot group. The administrator holds both the Global Secure Access Administrator and Application Administrator roles. Pilot users are direct members of the pilot group. Nested groups are not used. An active Microsoft Entra private network connector can reach every host in 10.48.12.0/24. During the transition, pilot users must reach multiple resources anywhere in that subnet, but only over TCP ports 443 and 445. Tailspin is not ready to define a separate enterprise application for each resource. Only the pilot group should receive access, and traffic must use Microsoft Entra Private Access. Which configuration should the Global Secure Access Administrator implement? Option A. Create one per-app private access application for a single FQDN on TCP 443 and assign it to all tenant users. Option B. Create quick access with the active connector group. Add 10.48.12.0/24 as an application segment for TCP 443 and 445. Assign the pilot group to the Quick Access Enterprise app and enable the private access traffic forwarding profile. Option C. Create quick access with the active connector group and add 10.48.12.0/24 for TCP 443 and 445, but leave the enterprise app unassigned and the private access profile disabled. Option D. Enable the Internet Access Traffic Forwarding profile for the pilot group and add 10.48.12.0/24 as an Internet Access bypass. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Create quick access with the active connector group. Add 10.48.12.0/24 as an application segment for TCP 443 and 445. Assign the pilot group to the Quick Access Enterprise app and enable the private access traffic forwarding profile. Microsoft documents quick access as a transition mechanism before per-app segmentation. A quick access configuration selects a connector group and accepts FQDNs, IP addresses, or ranges with multiple ports. The documented end-to-end path also requires assigning users or groups to the generated enterprise application and enabling the private access traffic forwarding profile. The correct plan therefore expresses the private CIDR and only the required ports, scopes entitlement to the pilot group, and turns on the matching traffic path. Exam clue. For private access, separate four dependencies: connector reachability, destination and port definition, enterprise app assignment, and traffic profile enablement. Quick access fits broad transitional coverage. Per app access fits later granular segmentation. Question 11 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has a report-only conditional access policy that should require multi-factor authentication when a pilot user accesses the Azure portal from an Android device outside a trusted named location. During an incident, the security team prohibits generating new test sign-ins. An identity security analyst must determine whether the policy would apply to the intended sign-in, and if it would not, identify the first policy condition that is not satisfied. What should the analyst use? Option A. Inspect the Conditional Access tab of the pilot user's latest sign-in log entry. Option B. Review the Risky Users report for the pilot user and dismiss any active risk detection. Option C. Run the Conditional Access What If tool with the pilot user, Azure portal, Android platform, client app, and untrusted source location as inputs. Option D. Inspect the audit log entry created when the report-only policy was last modified. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Run the Conditional Access What If tool with the pilot user, Azure portal, Android platform, client app, and untrusted source location as inputs. The What If tool evaluates enabled and report-only conditional access policies against supplied identity, target resource, and sign-in conditions without requiring a real sign-in. Its report separates policies that apply from policies that do not, and gives the first unsatisfied condition for a non-applicable policy. Supplying the complete intended context lets the analyst test this policy while honoring the incident freeze. Exam clue. Use event logs to explain a sign-in that happened. Use what if to estimate policy evaluation for a precisely defined sign-in that has not happened. Question 12 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has workload identities premium licenses. A single-tenant service principal named export daemon requests tokens from an untrusted public IP address. A conditional access policy blocks access from outside trusted locations, but the policy targets a group that contains export daemon. Sign-in evidence shows that the policy is not applied to the service principal. The policy must directly protect export daemon without affecting workforce users. What should the identity security analyst do? Option A. Remove export daemon's current Azure RBAC role and assign it a custom role with fewer permissions. Option B. Keep the user's assignment and add export daemon to a second included security group. Option C. Replace export daemon with a managed identity and include that managed identity in the same conditional access policy. Option D. Change the policy assignment to workload identities. Include select service principals, and select export daemon directly. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Change the policy assignment to workload identities, include select service principals, and select export daemon directly. Workload identity conditional access can target eligible single-tenant service principals. Microsoft documents that service principal group membership does not cause a group assigned policy to be enforced for that service principal. Selecting workload identities and directly including export daemon places the token request in the correct policy assignment plane while leaving workforce users out of scope. Exam clue. For conditional access, service principals do not inherit enforcement through an included user group. Target an eligible service principal directly as a workload identity. Question 13 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has a Microsoft Entra integrated incident application. Analysts can view dashboards with their normal session, but exporting unredacted incident data must require a phishing-resistant authentication strength and a compliant device. The application is configured to request authentication context C7 only when a user starts that export. Which conditional access configuration should the identity security analyst implement? Option A. Create authentication context C7, publish it to apps, and create a conditional access policy whose target resource is authentication context C7 and whose grant controls require the authentication strength and compliant device. Option B. create authentication context C7 without publishing it to apps, then enter C7 as a device filter value in the policy. Option C, create a conditional access policy that targets the entire incident application and applies both grant controls to every access attempt. Option D, target the register security information user action and require the authentication strength and compliant device. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A, create authentication context C7, publish it to apps, and create a conditional access policy whose target resource is authentication context C7 and whose grant controls require the authentication strength and compliant device. Authentication context lets an application request conditional access protection for specific data or actions. Publishing C7 makes the definition available to the application, and targeting C7 under conditional access target resources binds the requested action to the required grant controls. Because the application requests C7 only for the export, normal dashboard access remains outside that step-up policy. Exam clue. When stronger controls are required for one action rather than an entire app, publish an authentication context and target that context in conditional access. Question 14 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso allows analysts to use personally owned Windows, iOS, and Android devices during incident response. Users must keep signing in to each device with their personal local credentials, while the devices receive an identity in Contoso's tenant and provide single sign-on to cloud resources. Contoso must not treat the devices as organization-owned. Which device relationship should the administrator configure? Option A, Microsoft Entra Hybrid Joined. Option B, Microsoft Entra Registered. Option C, add each device object as a member of an administrative unit. Option D, Microsoft Entra Joined. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B, Microsoft Entra Registered. Microsoft identifies registration as the modern device scenario for bring your own devices and mobile devices. Registration creates a device identity and supports cloud SSO, while users retain the personal device sign-in and ownership model. Microsoft Entra Join instead aligns with organization-owned Windows devices. Exam clue. Use ownership and platform as the first discriminator. Personal BYOD and mobile devices point to registration. Organization-owned Windows devices point to join. Question 15 of 45. Select two answers. Contoso permits a pilot incident response group to use unmanaged devices in a web browser. SharePoint Online is already configured to prevent downloads from unmanaged devices, and Exchange Online is configured to restrict attachment access. The pilot users must retain limited browser access instead of being blocked. Which two settings should the identity security analyst configure in the conditional access policy? Option A. Under Target Resources, include the Office 365 resource. Option B. Under Session Controls, select Use App Enforced Restrictions. Option C. Under Session Controls, select Use Conditional Access App Control. Option D. Under Grant Controls, require the device to be marked as compliant. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Under Session Controls, select Use App Enforced Restrictions, and A. Under Target Resources, include the Office 365 resource. Application Enforced Restrictions let supported Microsoft 365 applications apply their own limited access behavior to unmanaged sessions. Microsoft's documented conditional access configuration targets Office 365 and selects Use App Enforced Restrictions under Session Controls. Because SharePoint and Exchange restrictions are already configured, these two settings preserve browser access while allowing those services to restrict downloads and attachments. Exam clue. When the application already knows how to limit an unmanaged session, target that application suite and pass the session state with Use App Enforced Restrictions. Do not replace limited access with a device compliance block. Question 16 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso uses cloud discovery to identify Salesforce traffic, but no Salesforce API app connector has been configured. Salesforce Shield, the required Defender for Cloud Apps licenses, and authorized administrator consent are available. During an investigation, the identity security analyst must view Salesforce accounts, privileges, sign-in activity, user activity, and administrative activity in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. The analyst must also use supported user governance actions against compromised Salesforce accounts. What should the analyst configure? Option A. Create an OAuth app policy for applications that request Salesforce permissions. Option B. Route every Salesforce browser session through conditional access app control. Option C. Keep Salesforce as a discovered app and increase the Cloud Discovery log collector upload frequency. Option D. Connect the Salesforce instance by using its Defender for Cloud Apps API app connector. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Connect the Salesforce instance by using its Defender for Cloud Apps API app connector. Defender for Cloud Apps app connectors use a cloud provider's APIs to collect account and activity data and expose supported governance capabilities. The archive capability tables list Salesforce accounts, privileges, logon, user, and administrative activity as supported with Salesforce Shield, and separately list user governance support for Salesforce. Because the stem states that no Salesforce API app connector exists, and the required licensing and consent are available, connecting the Salesforce instance through its API app connector uniquely supplies the evidence and response plane that Cloud Discovery alone lacks. Exam clue. Separate the Cloud Apps planes. Discovery observes traffic. An API connector inventories and governs the SaaS tenant. And Conditional Access App Control governs live proxied sessions. Question 17 of 45. Match each requirement to one response. Each response is used once. Contoso is replacing manually managed service credentials. Match each workload requirement to the primary identity that fits its hosting and scale boundary. Requirements. Requirement 1. The same Windows service runs on 4 domain-joined servers behind a load balancer. All instances must share one identity and SPN for Kerberos. Requirement 2. An Azure function calls Key Vault without a signed-in user and must obtain Microsoft Entra tokens without storing a password, secret, or certificate. Requirement 3. A Windows service runs on one domain-joined server, needs a domain account and SPN, and must have Windows manage its password automatically. Target bank. Choice A. A standalone managed service account, SMSA. Choice B. A managed identity assigned to the Azure workload. Choice C. A group managed service account, GMSA. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to C, a group managed service account, GMSA. Requirement 2 maps to B, a managed identity assigned to the Azure workload. Requirement 3 maps to A, a standalone managed service account, SMSA. This item focuses on the Windows Service Account Scale Boundary, SMSA for one domain host, GMSA for a multi-host service farm, and Managed Identity for supported Azure app-only token acquisition. Exam clue. Start with authority plane and host count, one domain host, a domain service farm, or supported Azure compute. Question 18 of 45. Select one answer. During incident containment, Contoso must change the direct license assignment for one responder account. The account must keep security SKU, but service plan risky plan within that SKU must be disabled. In the same operation, the account must receive replacement SKU and lose legacy SKU. The analyst knows all SKU IDs and the service plan ID and must change license state without changing group membership or conditional access. Which Microsoft Graph request should the analyst use? Option A. Post/users/ID/assign license with replacement SKU in add licenses, and both risky pans and legacy SKU in remove licenses. Option B. Patch/users/ID and replace the user's assigned licenses property with security SKU and replacement SKU while omitting legacy SKU. Option C. Post/users/ID/assign license with security SKU in add licenses and risky platform in that entry's disabled plans, replacement SKU as another add licenses entry, and legacy SKU in remove licenses. Option D. Leave all licenses unchanged and create a conditional access policy that blocks the responder from the cloud application associated with risky plan. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Post/users/ID/assign license with security SQ in add licenses and risky planes in that entry's disabled plans, replacement SKU as another add licenses entry, and legacy SKU in remove licenses. The user assign license action is the documented direct license mutation surface. Its add licenses collection accepts assigned license objects, where disabled plans identify service plans that remain disabled under a retained or assigned SKU. Its remove licenses collection accepts SKU IDs and is required even when empty. One request can therefore restate security SKU with risky plan disabled, add replacement SKU, and remove legacy SKU without substituting group or access policy controls. Exam clue. Separate SKU removal from service plan disablement. SKU IDs go in remove licenses, while a retained SKU's excluded service plans go in that add licenses object's disabled plans. Question 19 of 45. Arrange all actions from first to last. Contoso is onboarding Fabricam incident response contractors. Only identities from Fabricam's Microsoft Entra tenant may request a package containing the incident SharePoint site and response application. Fabricam's designated external sponsor is an existing Contoso guest who can sign in to My Access and can be selected both as the connected organization's external sponsor and as the package policy's specific access review reviewer. The sponsor must approve requests and review active assignments monthly. Assignments expire after 30 days. Contoso already blocks an entitlement managed guest when the guest loses the final access package assignment and removes the guest object 7 days later. For one contractor, this package will be the only access package assignment. Order the actions that implement and exercise the complete lifecycle. Items in the displayed order. Item A. At the monthly review, have the sponsor deny the contractor. After the review closes and results, remove the final package assignment, verify sign-in blocking, and 7-day guest removal. Item B. Create a connected organization for Fabricam's Microsoft Entra directory and add the existing Contoso guest as Fabricam's external sponsor. Item C. In an external enabled catalog, create the incident access package, add the required SharePoint and application resource roles, and configure its initial policy for users outside the directory to select only Fabricam, require its external sponsor's approval, expire assignments after 30 days, and run monthly reviews with that sponsor selected as the specific reviewer. Item D. Have the Fabricam contractor request the package in My Access and have the external sponsor approve the pending request. Lock in your answer. The correct order is Step 1. Create a connected organization for Fabricam's Microsoft Entra directory and add the existing Contoso guest as Fabricam's external sponsor. Step 2. In an external enabled catalog, create the incident access package, add the required SharePoint and application resource roles, and configure its initial policy for users outside the directory to select only Fabricam, require its external sponsor's approval, expire assignments after 30 days, and run monthly reviews with that sponsor selected as the specific reviewer. Step 3. Have the Fabricam contractor request the package in My Access, and have the external sponsor approve the pending request. Step 4. At the monthly review, have the sponsor deny the contractor. After the review closes and results, remove the final package assignment. Verify sign-in blocking and 7-day guest removal. Microsoft documents that a specific connected organization's policy can select only an organization previously added, so Fabricam and its already invited guest sponsor are established first. Every access package must have at least one policy, so the next compound stage creates the package and resource roles together with the required initial external policy for Fabricam, sponsor approval, 30-day expiration, and monthly review by the selected sponsor. A matching contractor request then enters sponsor approval and creates an active assignment. The monthly review can evaluate that assignment. Denial removes access only when results are applied after the review closes. Because this is the contractor's final package assignment, the existing tenant controls then block sign-in and remove the guest after 7 days. Each stage consumes state created by the preceding stage, yielding one source-closed total order without arbitrarily ordering independent prerequisites. Exam clue. Trace only mandatory dependencies. The connected organization must exist before an initial policy can select it. The package and that policy must exist before a request. Approval creates the active assignment reviewed later. Applied denial results remove the final assignment before guest cleanup. Question 20 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso is planning authentication for a privileged incident response group. Responders use supported iOS and Android devices with Microsoft Authenticator. They must move from password-only accounts to a phishing-resistant passwordless method that is device-bound. During supervised onboarding, users have no existing Microsoft Entra multi-factor authentication method. Which authentication plan meets the requirements? Option A. Enable and target a device-bound Microsoft Authenticator passkey profile for the responder group. Enable temporary access pass for that group, and issue each user a time-limited tap to register the passkey during onboarding. Option B. Enable Microsoft Authenticator push notifications for the responder group, and keep passwords as the primary sign-in method. Option C. Deploy Windows Hello for Business to the responder group, and use it as the only authentication method for their iOS and Android devices. Option D. Create a conditional access policy that requires phishing-resistant authentication strength, but do not enable a passkey method or provide a registration bootstrap credential. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Enable and target a device-bound Microsoft Authenticator passkey profile for the responder group. Enable temporary access pass for that group, and issue each user a time-limited tap to register the passkey during onboarding. Microsoft lists Authenticator app passkeys among phishing-resistant passwordless options. The passkey FIDO2 authentication methods policy supports a device-bound authenticator profile that can be targeted to a group. A temporary access pass is a separate, time-limited bootstrap credential that lets a password-only user onboard another passwordless method without an existing MFA method. Targeting both policies and issuing a tap for supervised registration satisfies the durable method, platform, and bootstrap requirements. Exam clue. Plan passwordless rollout in 2 layers. Select the durable, phishing-resistant method for the user's platforms, then provide a short-lived bootstrap path for initial registration or recovery. Question 21 of 45. Select two answers. Contoso uses a Microsoft Entra security group to grant access to incident response workspaces. The group owners will review membership every quarter. When a review ends, Contoso requires Microsoft Entra to remove users whom reviewers deny, and also remove users for whom no reviewer submits a decision. Which two access review settings should the Identity Security Analyst configure? Option A. Set if reviewers don't respond to approve access. Option B. Enable auto-apply results to resource. Option C. Enable email notifications and reminders for reviewers. Option D. Set if reviewers don't respond to remove access. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Enable auto-apply results to resource, and D. Set if reviewers don't respond to remove access. Auto-apply results to resource causes denied users to be removed automatically when the review duration ends. Setting if reviewers don't respond to remove access supplies a denial outcome for users whom no reviewer evaluates. Together, the two settings enforce both explicit denials and non-responses without a separate manual apply step. Exam clue. Separate the decision made for an unanswered review item from the setting that applies review decisions to the resource. Question 22 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso is retiring the custom domain legacy.contoso.com from Microsoft 365. The domain is not the default domain. Domain removal fails, and the dependency report shows that only the user principal name, analyst@legacy.contoso.com, still uses the domain. What should the Identity Security Analyst do first? Option A. Delete the domain verification TXT record at the DNS registrar. Option B. Change the user principal name to use another verified domain in the tenant. Option C. Make legacy.contoso.com the default domain. Option D. Assign the affected user the domain name administrator role. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Change the user principal name to use another verified domain in the tenant. Microsoft documents that no users can use a domain before it is removed. The dependency report isolates the remaining reference to the analyst's UPN, so changing that UPN to another verified tenant domain removes the blocker. DNS record deletion and role assignment do not change the directory reference. Exam clue. When domain deletion reports a referencing object, remediate that object's address or sign-in name before retrying removal. Question 23 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso will classify each user with exactly one incident project code. Valid codes are IR Red, IR Blue, and IR Gold, and administrators must not be able to assign any other value. Which custom security attribute definition should the Identity Security Analyst create? Option A. A string attribute that allows multiple values and permits free-form values. Option B. A Boolean attribute that disallows multiple values. Option C. An integer attribute with the 3 project codes entered as predefined values. Option D. A string attribute that disallows multiple values, allows only predefined values, and defines IR Red, IR Blue, and IR Gold. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. A string attribute that disallows multiple values, allows only predefined values, and defines IR Red, IR Blue, and IR Gold. Custom security attribute definitions support string values, single value assignment, and predefined only values. A string definition preserves the named codes. Disabling multiple values prevents a user from holding more than one project code value. And predefined only assignment prevents administrators from entering unapproved codes. The definition does not, by itself, require every user to receive a value. The assignment process must ensure each user is classified. Exam clue. Translate each data requirement separately. Value shape chooses the data type. Cardinality chooses single versus multiple, and governance chooses predefined only versus free-form. Question 24 of 45. Select 2 answers. Contoso has integrated Microsoft Defender for Endpoint with Defender for Cloud Apps. In the Cloud App Catalog, the security team identifies App A as prohibited and requires endpoint blocking for it. The team also decides that sanctioned App B must immediately have an organization-specific risk score of 2 without changing the weighting of any risk factors. Which 2 actions should the identity security analyst take? Option A, tag App A as unsanctioned. Option B, submit a request to Microsoft for a risk score update for App B. Option C, create an app discovery anomaly detection policy for App A. Option D, use override app score to set App B's risk score to 2. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are D, use override app score to set App B's risk score to 2, and A, tag App A as unsanctioned. With Defender for Endpoint integration enabled, Defender for Cloud Apps creates block indicators for cloud applications tagged unsanctioned. For App B, override app score applies an immediate per-app score for the organization without changing the risk factor weighting. A Microsoft Score update request is externally reviewed rather than an immediate local override. Exam clue. Use an app tag to express organizational approval status, and use a score override, not a vendor update request, for an immediate local risk decision. Question 25 of 45. Select 1 answer. Contoso must rapidly stage 180 internal member accounts for a temporary incident response team. The accounts must be created in Microsoft Entra ID in one portal bulk operation, but every account must remain unable to sign in until authentication methods and access policies are assigned. No invitation email should be sent. A user administrator is available. Which action should the administrator take? Option A, create a new CSV containing only user principal names. Remove the downloaded version and column header rows and upload it to bulk create. Option B, use bulk invite with the external user CSV template and suppress the invitation message for every row. Option C, in Entra ID, users, bulk create, download the current CSV template. Keep its version and header rows unchanged, add 1 user per row with the 4 required fields, and block sign-in set to yes, then validate and submit the file. Option D, use the group bulk import members operation with the 180 user principal names and configure the target group to create any missing users as blocked member accounts. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. In Entra ID, users, bulk create. Download the current CSV template, keep its version and header rows unchanged, add 1 user per row with the 4 required fields, and block sign-in set to yes. Then validate and submit the file. Microsoft Entra Bulk Create is the portal operation for creating many internal member accounts without guest invitations. Its downloaded CSV template must preserve any version row and the column headers. The first 4 fields are required, and setting block sign-in to yes stages each account with sign-in disabled. Validation and submission start the single bulk job, while bulk operation results exposes row-level failures. Exam clue. Match each bulk task to its operation-specific portal template. Bulk create is for internal member accounts. Bulk invite is for external guests, and group member operations use a different template from user creation. Question 26 of 45. Select 1 answer. After a phishing campaign, Contoso will add a tenant-specific sign-in page title, banner logo, and help text so employees can recognize the legitimate Microsoft Entra sign-in experience. The required company branding license is already assigned. The identity security analyst must configure and publish the branding, but must not receive broader user, security policy, or tenant administration permissions. Which role should Contoso assign? Option A, User Administrator. Option B, Organizational Branding Administrator. Option C, Global Reader. Option D, Security Administrator. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B, Organizational Branding Administrator. Organizational Branding Administrator is the documented minimum role for customizing company branding. It lets the analyst work under Entra ID, custom branding, and publish the sign-in experience without granting broad user management, security administration, or tenant-wide global administrator authority. Exam clue. Treat a security-motivated task by its administrative object, not by its story. Modifying sign-in branding calls for the branding-specific least privilege role, not a general security role. Question 27 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso synchronizes selected users to Fabricam by using cross-tenant synchronization. During an approved partner offboarding, 74 users are intentionally removed from the source configuration scope. The configuration has Prevent Accidental Deletions enabled with a threshold of 50. The provisioning status now reports that the job is quarantined and no target accounts have been deleted. The analyst reviews the provisioning logs and confirms that all 74 pending deletions are intended. What should the analyst do to complete the offboarding? Option A. On the provisioning status page, select Allow Deletes and confirm the action. Option B. Leave the job quarantined and manually delete the 74 B2B users from the Fabricam target tenant. Option C. Select Restart Provisioning without changing the source scope or accepting the pending deletions. Option D. Assign the 74 users to the source configuration again. Restart provisioning, and then remove them from scope a second time. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. On the provisioning status page, select Allow Deletes and confirm the action. Accidental deletion prevention quarantines a provisioning job when pending deletions meet or exceed the configured threshold, preventing unexpected target tenant deletions. After the logs establish that the removals are intentional, Allow Deletes explicitly accepts the objects that triggered the threshold. Microsoft documents that the status returns to healthy with the next cycle. Restart is appropriate only after correcting the cause of deletions that should be rejected. Exam clue. When a provisioning deletion threshold is crossed, first classify the pending deletions. Accept verified intended removals with Allow Deletes. For unintended removals, correct source scope or configuration before restarting. Question 28 of 45. Select two answers. Woodgrove has a conditional access policy for the incident console. The policy targets response analysts and the application, uses a high sign-in risk condition, blocks access, and excludes both an emergency account and a trusted name location. During an investigation, the sign-in log for a compromised analyst shows sign-in risk high. The analyst accessed the console from an IP address in that excluded trusted name location. The policy result is report only, not applied, and access succeeds. Woodgrove must enforce the tested risk control while retaining only the emergency account exclusion. Which two changes should the analyst make? Option A. Assign the analyst the security reader role and leave the policy in report-only mode. Option B. Change enable policy from report only to on after validating the revised scope. Option C. Remove the trusted name location exclusion from the policy conditions. Option D. Dismiss the sign-in risk and leave the policy configuration unchanged. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Change enable policy from report only to on after validating the revised scope. And C. Remove the trusted named location exclusion from the policy conditions. The sign-in event explicitly shows high sign-in risk for a targeted analyst and application, while the policy configuration explicitly excludes the trusted named location used by the event. Because conditional access policies apply only when all configured conditions are satisfied, removing that location exclusion brings this event into the intended scope while preserving the emergency account exclusion. Report only evaluates and logs, but does not enforce. So after validating the revised scope, change enable policy from report only to on. Together, these changes repair both scope and enforcement. Exam clue. When a conditional access control fails, separate scope from enforcement. Use the per policy sign-in result to identify why it did not apply. Then verify whether its state can actually enforce. Question 29 of 45. Select two answers. Woodgrove confirms that an attacker used a cloud-only analyst account to access the incident console. The risky users report shows high user risk. Sign-in logs show an active, unauthorized session, and investigators cannot trust the account's current password or registered MFA method. The response team can contact the analyst through a verified out-of-band channel. Which two actions should the team take to contain the attacker and remediate the account? Option A. After verifying the analyst out of band, have an authorized administrator reset the password and deliver the temporary credential securely. Option B. Dismiss the user risk, then wait for token expiration before allowing the analyst to continue. Option C. Block the user and revoke the user's refresh and access tokens. Option D. Confirm the risky sign-in as safe because the account owner is a response analyst. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A. After verifying the analyst out of band, have an authorized administrator reset the password and deliver the temporary credential securely. And C. Block the user and revoke the user's refresh and access tokens. Microsoft's investigation guidance says that when an attacker may impersonate a user, responders should block the user and revoke refresh and access tokens. Active compromise evidence makes session revocation critical. The remediation guidance documents administrator password reset as a manual remediation path that changes the user's risk state from at risk to remediated. Secure out-of-band verification and delivery. Avoid trusting the compromised authentication factors. Exam clue. Treat a confirmed compromise as two linked problems. Stop existing sessions immediately, then replace the compromised credential through a trusted recovery path so the risk state is genuinely remediated. Question 30 of 45. Arrange all actions from first to last. Woodgrove must preserve Microsoft Entra sign-in and audit telemetry for investigation with KQL. The administrator has at least the security administrator role in Microsoft Entra, and the Azure permissions required to create and access the workspace. The Azure subscription does not yet contain a log analytics workspace. Order the actions needed to establish the destination and prove that new tenant activity is queryable. Items in the displayed order. Item A. Perform a controlled test sign-in and a documented tenant configuration change to generate new sign-in and audit events. Item B. Create a log analytics workspace in the approved Azure subscription and region, and verify the required access permissions. Item C. After ingestion, query the sign-in logs and audit logs tables in the workspace and verify the test events. Item D. In Microsoft Entra diagnostic settings, select the required sign-in and audit log categories. Choose Send to Log Analytics Workspace. Select the subscription and workspace and save. Lock in your answer. The correct order is Step 1. Create a log analytics workspace in the approved Azure subscription and region, and verify the required access permissions. Step 2. In Microsoft Entra diagnostic settings, select the required sign-in and audit log categories. Choose Send to Log Analytics Workspace, select the subscription and workspace, and save. Step 3. Perform a controlled test sign-in and a documented tenant configuration change to generate new sign-in and audit events. Step 4. After ingestion, query the sign-in logs and audit logs tables in the workspace and verify the test events. Microsoft documents a log analytics workspace as a prerequisite, and then directs administrators to add a Microsoft Entra diagnostic setting. Choose Log Categories, select Send to Log Analytics Workspace, select the subscription and workspace, and save. Because diagnostic settings route telemetry after configuration, controlled events should be generated next. Querying sign-in logs and audit logs after ingestion is the final proof that both selected categories reach the intended query destination. Exam clue. For diagnostic pipelines, follow dependency order. Create the destination, configure and save routing, generate fresh evidence, then query the destination after ingestion. Question 31 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso detects that an attacker copied an employee's active Microsoft 365 session. The employee's Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Teams clients support Continuous Access Evaluation, CAE. Investigation confirms that the password is not compromised, and the employee account must remain enabled during a short evidence preservation window. The Identity Security Analyst is authorized to contain the stolen session immediately. What should the analyst do? Option A. Enable security defaults for the tenant. Option B. Create a conditional access policy that sets sign-in frequency to 1 hour for the employee. Option C. Add the employee to a group targeted by a block access policy and wait for policy propagation. Option D. Select Revoke Sessions on the employee's user profile. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Select Revoke Sessions on the employee's user profile. Explicitly revoking the user sessions revokes refresh tokens and produces a CAE critical event. Supported Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Teams resources receive the revocation event and reevaluate the presented token near real time. This contains the stolen session without disabling the employee account. The documented propagation can still take up to about 15 minutes. Exam clue. For CAE, distinguish periodic session policy from a critical event. Use explicit revocation when an existing supported resource session must be reevaluated now. Question 32 of 45. Select one answer. A Contoso Identity Security Analyst has the Security Reader role. The analyst can review risky sign-ins and conditional access results, but receives an insufficient privileges error when attempting to update an existing conditional access policy during incident response. The analyst does not need to assign directory roles or manage Azure subscription resources. Which built-in Microsoft Entra role should a privileged administrator assign to provide the required authority with least privilege? Option A. Owner on the Azure subscription. Option B. Security Reader. Option C. Conditional Access Administrator. Option D. Privileged Role Administrator. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Conditional Access Administrator. Microsoft documents that Conditional Access Administrator can manage Microsoft Entra conditional access settings, including creating, updating, and deleting conditional access policies. Security Reader is read-only for security information and reports. Because the task is policy editing rather than role assignment or Azure Resource Management, Conditional Access Administrator is the least privileged listed role that closes the observed authorization gap. Exam clue. Diagnose role failures from the denied operation. Visibility requires a read role, while changing a conditional access policy requires a role with that policy management capability. Question 33 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso sends Microsoft Entra sign-in logs to a log analytics workspace. A second analyst can open the sign-ins workbook and query current rows, proving that the diagnostic setting and data destination are working. A new identity security analyst has reports reader in Microsoft Entra ID, but the workbook displays an authorization error for the workspace. The analyst must only view workbook data and must not change diagnostic or workspace settings. What should Contoso do? Option A. Assign Log Analytics Reader to the analyst on the existing workspace. Option B. Replace Reports Reader with Security Administrator in Microsoft Entra ID. Option C. Open Identity Secure Score and apply its highest impact recommendation. Option D. Change the diagnostic setting to Archive Sign-in Logs only to an Azure storage account. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Assign Log Analytics Reader to the analyst on the existing workspace. Microsoft Entra workbooks require both an appropriate Entra role and access to the Log Analytics workspace. Reports Reader satisfies the read-only Entra role requirement. Log Analytics Reader is a documented view role for the workspace and supplies only the missing query authorization without the broader modification rights of a contributor role. Exam clue. Workbook access crosses two authorization planes: verify an Entra reporting role and an Azure role on the workspace independently. Question 34 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso wants every administrator who deletes a conditional access policy to complete phishing-resistant MFA at the moment of deletion. The requirement must apply whether the administrator received the permission through a permanent role assignment or through privileged identity management. An emergency account will be excluded. Which configuration should the identity security analyst implement? Option A. Create a conditional access policy for all cloud apps that requires phishing-resistant MFA and 1-hour sign-in frequency. Option B. Create an authentication context. Create a conditional access policy for that context that requires phishing-resistant MFA and assign the context to Microsoft Directory /conditional access policies/delete as a protected action. Option C. Require phishing-resistant MFA only in the PIM activation settings for Conditional Access Administrator. Option D. Create an authentication context and assign it directly to each Conditional Access Administrator role assignment without associating it with the delete permission. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Create an authentication context, create a conditional access policy for that context that requires phishing-resistant MFA, and assign the context to Microsoft.digital/conditional access policies selectively as a protected action. Protected actions apply conditional access to selected Microsoft Entra permissions independently of how a user obtained the permission. The documented setup is to configure an authentication context and associated conditional access policy, then assign that context to the supported permission. Binding phishing-resistant MFA to Microsoft Directories /conditional access policies/delete therefore produces step-up enforcement when deletion is attempted across permanent and PIM-based role paths. Exam clue. When protection must follow a high-impact operation rather than a sign-in or role activation path, bind conditional access authentication context to the supported permission. Question 35 of 45. Match each requirement to one remediation. Each remediation is used once. A security review of Contoso's production tenant identifies 3 enterprise application consent requirements. Individual application properties and app registrations must remain unchanged. Match each requirement to the tenant-level remediation. Requirements. Requirement 1. End users in this population must not be allowed to self-consent to applications. Administrator-controlled consent remains available. Requirement 2. When users cannot consent, they must be able to submit a request to designated reviewers, who must not gain approval permission merely by being named as reviewers. Requirement 3. Users may self-consent only for apps from verified publishers or apps registered in Contoso, and only for permissions classified as low impact. Target bank. Choice A. Enable the admin consent workflow and configure the reviewer list. Choice B. Allow user consent subject to the built-in low-risk app consent policy. Choice C. Disable user consent in the tenant-wide authorization policy. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to C. Disable user consent in the tenant-wide authorization policy. Requirement 2 maps to A. Enable the admin consent workflow and configure the reviewer list. Requirement 3 maps to B. Allow user consent subject to the built-in low-risk app consent policy. These are tenant-level consent outcomes, not settings on one service principal. Disabling end-user self-consent by removing managed permission grants for self-policies handles the first requirement without implying that distinct managed permission grants for owned resource policies are removed. The built-in low-risk policy preserves limited self-service under publisher and permission classification boundaries. The admin consent workflow supplies a request channel and designated reviewers when self-consent is blocked, while approval authority remains controlled by the reviewer's existing roles and permissions. Exam clue. Separate 3 consent decisions: whether users may self-consent at all, which app and permission conditions permit self-consent, and how blocked users request an administrator decision. Question 36 of 45. Match each requirement to one remediation. Each remediation is used once. After an enterprise application access review, Contoso must remediate 3 delegation findings. A custom role named assignment operator already contains only Microsoft directory /service principals /app role assigned to /update. A privileged role administrator and a cloud application administrator are available. Match each requirement to the least privileged remediation. Requirements. Requirement 1. Ava must manage SSO, provisioning, user assignments, and other owners for only the Finance SaaS Enterprise application. Requirement 2. Ben must add and remove user and group assignments for only the HR SaaS Enterprise application. An organization-wide assignment operator assignment found in the review must be removed. Requirement 3. Cora must add and remove user and group assignments for every enterprise application, but must not configure SSO or provisioning. Target bank. Choice A. Assign assignment operator from the specified enterprise application's roles and administrators page. Choice B. Assign assignment operator from the organization-wide roles and administrators page. Choice C. Add the user as an owner of the specified enterprise application. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to C. Add the user as an owner of the specified enterprise application. Requirement 2 maps to A. Assign assignment operator from the specified enterprise application's roles and administrators page. Requirement 3 maps to B. Assign assignment operator from the organization-wide roles and administrators page. Delegation is determined by both capability and scope. Ownership is appropriate when one operator needs broad, organization-specific management of one enterprise application. Assignment operator exposes only assignment management. Assigning it at an application resource limits Ben to HR SaaS, while assigning it organization-wide lets Cora manage assignments across the fleet. This repairs the review findings without substituting broad, built-in application administrator roles. Exam clue. Choose Enterprise Application Delegation in 2 passes. First, identify the needed capability set. Then choose whether its assignment scope is one service principal or the entire organization. Question 37 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso moved an executive user who has no Microsoft Entra administrator role directly into the Restricted Management Administrative Unit named Executive Protection. A trusted support engineer has Help Desk Administrator at tenant scope and a Microsoft Entra ID P1 license. Since the move, the engineer can read the user's standard properties but receives an authorization failure when attempting a password reset. Contoso must retain the restricted protection and allow only this trusted engineer to reset passwords for executive protection users. What should Contoso do? Option A. Remove the user from executive protection, add the user to a regular administrative unit, and scope Help Desk Administrator there. Option B. Replace the engineer's role with Global Administrator at tenant scope. Option C. Make the engineer an owner of the executive user's account and keep Help Desk Administrator at tenant scope. Option D. Assign Help Desk Administrator to the engineer explicitly at the Executive Protection Administrative Unit scope. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Assign Help Desk Administrator to the engineer explicitly at the Executive Protection Administrative Unit scope. Restricted Management Administrative Units block direct Microsoft Entra property changes, including password resets, by administrators who lack an explicit assignment at that restricted scope. Tenant-level roles, even Global Administrator, do not bypass the protection by themselves. Because the executive user has no Microsoft Entra administrator role, assigning the trusted engineer the supported Help Desk Administrator role at Executive Protection scope restores only the required password reset capability while preserving the restricted boundary. Exam clue. When a restricted administrative unit object becomes readable but not modifiable, inspect the role assignment scope. Tenant authority is intentionally blocked, and the remediation is an explicit supported role at the restricted scope. Question 38 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso's single-tenant deployment service principal is listed as at risk with a suspicious sign-ins detection after its approved migration from an on-premises runner to Azure. The identity security analyst verifies the change ticket, confirms the new certificate thumbprint in the audit logs, matches every post-migration sign-in to the approved Azure hosting range and expected resource, and finds no unauthorized role, credential, configuration, or Microsoft Graph activity. The workload is business critical and is not compromised. What should the analyst do in the Risky Workload Identities report? Option A. Disable the service principal. Option B. Confirm the service principal as compromised. Option C. Dismiss the service principal risk. Option D. Remove all existing credentials from the application and service principal. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Dismiss the service principal risk. Microsoft documents that suspicious workload sign-ins can be triggered after an authorized configuration change. Investigators should examine sign-ins, credential and configuration changes, and acquired roles, then dismiss risk or confirm compromise according to the result. Because all evidence reconciles to the approved migration and no compromise remains, dismissing the service principal risk is the correct report disposition without disrupting the workload. Exam clue. A workload risk detection is an investigation signal, not proof of compromise. Reconcile credential, configuration, role, and sign-in evidence before choosing dismiss, confirm compromised, or disable. Question 39 of 45. Select two answers. Fabricam is piloting Defender for Cloud Apps session governance for contractors who sign in to a supported SaaS application from unmanaged devices. The pilot has moved from impact assessment to production. Its evidence model records when a targeted browser session is established. File operation events will be analyzed in a later phase. Which two configurations implement the pilot exactly? Option A. Create a Defender for Cloud Apps session policy, scoped to the SaaS application with session control type set to control file download with inspection, and action set to audit. Option B. Keep the Microsoft Entra Conditional Access policy for the contractors and SaaS application in report only, with Use Conditional Access App Control selected under Session. Option C. Create a Defender for Cloud Apps session policy, scoped to the SaaS application with session control type set to monitor only. Option D. Enable the Microsoft Entra Conditional Access policy for the contractors and SaaS application with Use Conditional Access App Control selected under Session. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are C. Create a Defender for Cloud Apps session policy scoped to the SaaS application with session control type set to monitor only, and D. Enable the Microsoft Entra Conditional Access policy for the contractors and SaaS application with Use Conditional Access App Control selected under Session. An enabled conditional access policy with Use Conditional Access App Control sends the targeted application sessions through the control path. A Defender session policy with session control type monitor only records login activity, which matches the pilot evidence model. Report only evaluates conditional access policy impact without applying the session control, while control file download with audit is the documented choice for observing file download activity rather than a login-only dataset. Exam clue. Resolve two boundaries independently: whether traffic is actually routed and which activity grain the Defender session policy records. Question 40 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso moves an OIDC web application from https://old.contoso.com to https://portal.contoso.com. Sign in now fails with AADSTS 50011. The error names the expected application ID and shows https://portal.contoso.com/signin-OIDC as the redirect URI sent by the application. In the app registration, authentication lists only https://old.contoso.com/signin-OIDC. The application code is intentionally configured to use the new production URI. What should the identity security analyst do? Option A. Add https://portal.contoso.com/signin-OIDC to the app registration under authentication, save, and retry after the change propagates. Option B. Change the app registration to accounts in any organizational directory. Option C. Change the enterprise application homepage URL to https://portal.contoso.com. Option D. Grant tenant-wide admin consent for the application API permissions. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Add https://portal.contoso.com/sign-in-OIDC to the app registration under authentication, save, and retry after the change propagates. AADSTS 50011 occurs when the redirect URI sent by application code does not match any redirect URI configured in the Microsoft Entra app registration. Microsoft directs administrators to locate the registration by the application ID, open authentication, add the redirect URI displayed in the error, save, and retry after propagation. Because the new production callback is intentional, the registration, not audience, consent, or the enterprise application homepage, must be updated. Exam clue. For AADSTS50011, compare the callback sent by the application with the app registration authentication list. Repair the side that is wrong, and do not substitute audience or consent changes. Question 41 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso is integrating two acquired companies into its Microsoft Entra tenant. Each company retains a separate ADDS forest, and security policy prohibits network connectivity or trusts between the three forests. Each forest contains fewer than 50,000 objects. Contoso must synchronize users, groups, contacts, and password hashes from every forest, use outbound-only connectivity, and avoid a single synchronization server failure stopping updates. Which design should Contoso implement? Option A. Deploy one Microsoft Entra Connect Sync server in the Contoso forest, and add all three disconnected forests to that server. Option B. Create Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync configurations for the forests. Deploy provisioning agents in each forest, and deploy multiple active agents for high availability. Option C. Install only Microsoft Entra pass-through authentication agents in each forest, and enable seamless SSO. Option D. Deploy an ADFS farm in each forest, and federate all three domains with Microsoft Entra ID. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Create Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync configurations for the forests, deploy provisioning agents in each forest, and deploy multiple active agents for high availability. Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync is designed for multiple disconnected ADDS forests and uses lightweight provisioning agents that require only outbound connections. Deploying multiple active agents provides automatic failover, and Cloud Sync supports synchronization of users, groups, contacts, and password hashes. The other designs either assume connectivity to a central synchronization server or substitute an authentication mechanism for directory synchronization. Exam clue. Separate synchronization from authentication. Disconnected forests plus outbound-only agents and active agent failover point to Cloud Sync, while ADFS and pass-through authentication solve sign-in rather than object synchronization. Question 42 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso creates a conditional access policy for a finance application. The policy targets finance users, excludes emergency access accounts, and configures the sign-in frequency session control to every time for high-risk users. After a controlled pilot, the sign-in logs show 20 matching events as report only, user action required. No pilot user is prompted to re-authenticate, and the policy state is still report only. The analyst confirms that the logged impact is expected. What should the analyst do to remediate the issue? Option A. Keep the policy in report only and change sign-in frequency from every time to 1 hour. Option B. Leave the policy in report only and select revoke sessions for each pilot user. Option C. Change enable policy from report only to off, and then wait for the next sign-in evaluation. Option D. Change enable policy from report only to on, while retaining the validated assignments and controls. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Change enable policy from report only to on, while retaining the validated assignments and controls. Report only mode evaluates conditional access conditions and controls and records the projected result, but it does not enforce grant or session controls. Report only, user action required, means the matching sign-ins would require user action if the policy were enforced. After validating the expected impact, the documented deployment step is to change Enable policy from Report Only to On. Exam clue. When sign-in evidence appears only in the Report Only tab, distinguish Successful Evaluation from Enforcement. Preserve the validated control design and advance the policy lifecycle state to On. Question 43 of 45. Arrange all actions from first to last. Contoso is retiring the Legacy Incident Access catalog after a security review. The catalog contains one access package, Legacy Responder, with active user assignments. No future access is required. An identity governance administrator first attempts to delete the access package and then the catalog. Both operations are blocked. Order the actions that will retire the catalog without leaving active entitlements. Items in the displayed order. Item A. Delete the Legacy Responder access package. Item B. Delete the Legacy Incident Access catalog. Item C. Remove access for every user who has an active Legacy Responder assignment. Lock in your answer. The correct order is Step 1. Remove access for every user who has an active Legacy Responder assignment. Step 2. Delete the Legacy Responder access package. Step 3. Delete the Legacy Incident Access catalog. The two failures expose nested lifecycle dependencies. Legacy Responder must first have every active assignment removed, because Microsoft Entra will not delete an access package with active assignments. The package can then be deleted. Only after the catalog contains no access packages can Legacy Incident Access be deleted. Reversing either dependency leaves the requested deletion blocked. Exam clue. For entitlement management retirement, work from the leaf outward. Active assignments depend on an access package, and the access package belongs to a catalog. Question 44 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso assigns User Administrator to Branch Support Staff at the North Branch Administrative Unit scope. An audit confirms that the staff can update North Branch users and receive an authorization error when they try to update users outside the unit. However, the staff can still browse out-of-scope users in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center and PowerShell. The security analyst concludes that the administrative unit is misconfigured. What is the correct diagnosis? Option A. The administrative unit should be replaced by a security group whose owners are the branch support staff. Option B. The user should be placed in an Azure resource group, and user administrator should be assigned at that resource group scope. Option C. The administrative unit is working as designed. It scopes management permissions, but it does not prevent browsing outside the unit through default user permissions. Option D. The user administrator role must also be assigned at tenant scope so that administrative unit filtering can take effect. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. The administrative unit is working as designed. It scopes management permissions, but it does not prevent browsing outside the unit through default user permissions. Administrative units are appropriate when an organization must restrict supported Microsoft Entra role permissions to a defined population. The failed out-of-scope update proves that the user administrator assignment is correctly restricted. Microsoft documents that this scope applies only to management permissions. It does not stop members or administrators from browsing objects outside the unit through default user permissions. Therefore, browsing alone is not evidence of an administrative unit configuration failure. Exam clue. Distinguish authority from visibility. An administrative unit can limit which directory objects a scoped administrator may manage, without hiding every out-of-scope object from view. Question 45 of 45. Match each audit record to one adjudication. Use no adjudication more than once. One adjudication is not used. Evaluate all 4 clauses before matching. Contoso is reconciling 6 identity secure score audit records. Match each record to the one complete adjudication that is consistent with all 4 observations. Requirements. Requirement 1. A percentage scored action covers 37 of 200 users, and the audit contribution is all 8 available points. A supported configuration changed 30 hours ago, while the directory total remains unchanged. Leadership wants to report the percentage as a guarantee of protection. The work queue favors relevant high-importance recommendations over low-importance items that would raise a preferred threshold. Requirement 2. A percentage scored action covers 37 of 200 users, and the audit contribution is 1.48 of 8 available points. A supported configuration changed 30 hours ago, while the directory total remains unchanged. Leadership wants to report the percentage as a guarantee of protection. The work queue favors relevant high-importance recommendations over low-importance items that would raise a preferred threshold. Requirement 3. A percentage scored action covers 37 of 200 users, and the audit contribution is all 8 available points. A supported configuration changed 6 hours ago, while the directory total remains unchanged. Leadership wants to report the percentage as the probability of a breach. The work queue favors low-importance items that would raise a preferred threshold over relevant high-importance recommendations. Requirement 4. A percentage scored action covers 37 of 200 users, and the audit contribution is 1.48 of 8 available points. A supported configuration changed 6 hours ago, while the directory total remains unchanged. Leadership wants to report the percentage as a guarantee of protection. The work queue favors low-importance items that would raise a preferred threshold over relevant high-importance recommendations. Requirement 5. A percentage scored action covers 37 of 200 users, and the audit contribution is 1.48 of 8 available points. A supported configuration changed 6 hours ago, while the directory total remains unchanged. Leadership wants to report the percentage as the probability of a breach. The work queue favors relevant high-importance recommendations over low-importance items that would raise a preferred threshold. Requirement 6. A percentage scored action covers 37 of 200 users, and the audit contribution is 1.48 of 8 available points. A supported configuration changed 30 hours ago, while the directory total remains unchanged. Leadership wants to report the percentage as the probability of a breach. The work queue favors low-importance items that would raise a preferred threshold over relevant high-importance recommendations. Target bank. Choice A. Leave the contribution at 1.48 points. Investigate why a full daily evaluation interval passed without a new total. Refuse to present the percentage as breach likelihood, and reorder the queue around relevant high-importance work rather than the preferred threshold. Choice B. Replace the full award with a 1.48 point proportional contribution. Investigate why a full daily evaluation interval passed without a new total. Refuse to present the percentage as assured protection, and retain the relevance and importance ordering. Choice C. Replace the full award with a 1.48 point proportional contribution. Defer a staleness diagnosis until the daily evaluation interval has elapsed. Refuse to present the percentage as assured protection, and retain the relevance and importance ordering. Choice D. Replace the full award with a 1.48 point proportional contribution. Defer a staleness diagnosis until the daily evaluation interval has elapsed. Refuse to present the percentage as breach likelihood, and reorder the queue around relevant high-importance work rather than the preferred threshold. Choice E. Leave the contribution at 1.48 points. Investigate why a full daily evaluation interval passed without a new total. Refuse to present the percentage as assured protection, and retain the relevance and importance ordering. Choice F. Leave the contribution at 1.48 points. Defer a staleness diagnosis until the daily evaluation interval has elapsed. Refuse to present the percentage as breach likelihood, and retain the relevance and importance ordering. Choice G. Leave the contribution at 1.48 points. Defer a staleness diagnosis until the daily evaluation interval has elapsed. refuse to present the percentage as assured protection, and reorder the queue around relevant high-importance work rather than the preferred threshold. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to B. Replace the full award with a 1.48-point proportional contribution. Investigate why a full daily evaluation interval passed without a new total. Refuse to present the percentage as assured protection. And retain the relevance and importance ordering. Requirement 2 maps to E. Leave the contribution at 1.48 points. Investigate why a full daily evaluation interval passed without a new total. Refuse to present the percentage as assured protection. And retain the relevance and importance ordering. Requirement 3 maps to D. Replace the full award with a 1.48-point proportional contribution. Defer a staleness diagnosis until the daily evaluation interval has elapsed. Refuse to present the percentage as breach likelihood. And reorder the queue around relevant high-importance work rather than the preferred threshold. Requirement 4 maps to G. Leave the contribution at 1.48 points. Defer a staleness diagnosis until the daily evaluation interval has elapsed. Refuse to present the percentage as assured protection. And reorder the queue around relevant high-importance work rather than the preferred threshold. Requirement 5 maps to F. Leave the contribution at 1.48 points. Defer a staleness diagnosis until the daily evaluation interval has elapsed. Refuse to present the percentage as breach likelihood. And retain the relevance and importance ordering. Requirement 6 maps to A. Leave the contribution at 1.48 points. Investigate why a full daily evaluation interval passed without a new total. Refuse to present the percentage as breach likelihood. And reorder the queue around relevant high-importance work rather than the preferred threshold. The target and choice surfaces form parallel four-boundary code words. Each arithmetic, timing, interpretation, and priority value appears in multiple targets and choices, so no individual fact names an edge. The accepted edge is the only complete four-value agreement for each target. Exam clue. Model each record as four independent checks: credit, cadence, interpretation, and priority. Do not commit to an edge until all four checks agree. You completed all 45 questions. Group any misses by objective, identify the requirement you overlooked, and answer again from the mechanism rather than from a memorized keyword. Thanks for practicing with WebLizard's CertLab. Review your week objectives, revisit the complete exam clues, and continue with the next SC-300 practice exam when you are ready.